Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with another Xibalba dev stream. Today, we'll be doing a little bit of work on some visual design pillars, as well as a general presentation of the latest Regency, the 20th Regency, to be drafted. Probably do a bit of an update to them as well, because I'm sure I'll have some idea of how to improve the writing that I've done. So, yeah, we'll check that out. But before we begin, I should mention that we do have some stuff. We have some videos, some clips from the previous stream. So if you missed this stream over here and you want to see some highlights of me yelling about nonsense, well, you got two clips there. You can check them out. They're epic. All right. Setting that aside, I am always looking for clips to clip. There were some from a bit of a farther away video that unfortunately I will have to download manually or whatever. Because it doesn't always let me export it or directly from the YouTube editor. I don't know why. I think there's like a date of expiration on it or something. And the YouTube clip feature, the actual clip feature, only goes for a minute because they were trying to copy Twitch, including all of Twitch's stupid limitations. So that's not very useful for my purposes either, unless I actually do have a very small thing somewhere. But that's okay. That's not either here nor there. Let me present to you the Avot. So the Avot are the 20th Regency, and they are a pretty interesting concept. They are, as you can see on the sidebar there, listed as the second most weird, right? The first from the bottom, or second from the bottom, or whatever. Right below Kolopazos in terms of weird. So they're definitely going to be a rather bizarre Regency to play as, and also just conceptually. Essentially, the inspiration behind the Avot was a sort of organization of entities that themselves could be harvested for resources. I had kind of already hinted at that being the sort of trope behind the Thruck. So if anybody remembers, in Brood War, there's like some meme maps and even a whole meme campaign that actually did take itself seriously, unfortunately, that deals with critters, because critters are almost like always just dismissed or killed on sight or whatever. And so people like to make it so that like, oh, here's the critter. You didn't expect the big bad enemy boss to be a critter. Isn't that a funny meme? I'm sure the Bob levels did that at some point. But the point is, people will take like things that are in the game but are not directly related to how the game, like the game's races or factions or whatever, and they'll subvert that and use that as a race unto themselves sometimes. It's a common trend anyway, at least in custom content. Now, I was kind of already hinting that the Thruck, they're not exactly the resources you're harvesting, but they use the resources for like literally expanding themselves, so expanding their sizes and stuff. So there's a little bit of a hint at like playing around with that theme of like, oh, it's not the critter in this case, it's actually the resources, but it's the earth itself that you're building upon in some ways that is rising up against you. Now, the Avot aren't related to resources either necessarily, but the idea is that they themselves are very valuable as far as resources go. And that means that obviously a lot of their stuff is going to be fairly pricey, but it also means that their stuff is going to be somewhat volatile because they're not necessarily refined and processed energy sources the same way that you would need them to be for them to be useful for some sort of enterprise or industrialization. So I think with the Avot specifically, what you're going to see is some way to engage with the rubble of their structures is a current thing that I've drafted, where by sort of being around them, you enhance your capabilities of your combatants. And obviously that would be it would be regardless of allegiance. So both the Avot and their allies, as well as their enemies, would gain this benefit. These would be different ways, essentially, for the Avot themselves to have a little bit of a defender's advantage, but that could also turn into a very punishing, like almost a snowball effect, where the enemy who's able to pop some structures and then benefit from the enhanced attack speed or whatever the bonus ends up being, that is conferred by being near those resources or those rubble, the neutral stuff, that would allow them some sort of advantage. I'm also going to play around with the idea of maybe actually being able to generate resources by attacking Avot structures, but I'm not sure about that one. Like, that's obviously a little bit feels a little bit like there's a potential for that to operate outside the system and be a bit gimmicky. So we obviously don't want that. But I am thinking about ways to work that theme of the Avoti, as I have called them in plural, the Avotian Regency. I'm working in the idea of them being valuable as a commodity and trying to sort of play that up in their gameplay without it being massively gimmicky. What's up, Milestone? Welcome. So I won't read off everything here for the sake of it being unreasonable if I just started narrating that, but you can read it yourself at your own leisure. There is a decent amount of text here, and this is indeed concept number 20 for a Regency. Probably the last, at least out of the current expansion pack numbers that we have planned, assuming we stop at 20 Regencies, this would be a part of the final expansion pack that would also include Thruck. So I wouldn't expect anything massively like soon, but I did have that idea that I talked about in the previous stream where Regencies that are meant to come later on in expansions would actually have maybe a small handful of their units and structures implemented, and they would manifest as upstarts, as a little teaser, like, oh, cool. So, like, whatever Regencies, a really easy way to do this, right, would be for the Regencies that are coming in the next expansion pack. So expansion pack 1 comes out and brings with it 2 new Regencies. The Regencies that are slated for expansion pack 2 appear as upstarts. And that would be like a way to tease, like, oh, this is going to be what they're going to be like or whatever, and show that we have some idea of what their sort of gameplay styles are going to be and their art styles and stuff. But we're not necessarily ready just yet to deploy them. So that would be like an obvious way we could go about doing that. Now, I think as far as the overall approach goes with being able to like make a Regency literally out of energy, I don't know how that will go. And that might, again, warp a lot of the gameplay, but it'll be an interesting challenge from a conceptual standpoint, translating that into something for an RTS. But I still think it's a cool idea, so I decided to go with it. And that's the Avot. Check him out. What's up, Shirk? So I did mention earlier, as part of the intro, we'll be working on the Ansifii's visual design and trying to nail down some sort of consistent design pillars, I guess you could say, for the purpose of understanding what they are meant to be and what they're meant to look like. So I've actually already started that, but before I go further into that, I'll also mention what else we're going to do. Obviously, I did say that we're going to do an update to the Avot. That's because, well, obviously while we have a decent amount of work there, I still want to work through that and see if I have any other additions to make or alterations to make. Maybe I get some other ideas just in the middle of looking over it, or maybe the chat has some ideas that we work through and I can at least write those down in the ideas section, even if I can't immediately find a way to work them in. But beyond that, after the Avot update, which is after the Ansifii visual design pillars, which is what we're starting with, I do want to do some visual concept work. I'm thinking that the figuring out a good concept for the town center and then figuring out a good concept for the Maverick. These are all good ideas to get us started. And I guess if you missed it, one other thing I can mention briefly before we really get started is we do actually have some tech tree ideas or a tech tree map starting to manifest. This is very humble beginnings. We only have 3, count them, 3 units set up. We've got the Mason, we've got the Maverick, and we have the Squire. Now the Squire is actually Maverick is technically original insofar as it doesn't have Stimpak, but as you can see, it's very much like it's like a heavy-hitting version of the Marine from Brood War in many respects. It's very much meant to be like somewhat similar. So yes, Beaver, yes, 3, and 3 out of 100, as Shirk points out. Now the Squire is a completely new concept. This is a scout infantry, and the idea behind the Squire is that she's basically meant to be this unit that builds up momentum as they run, and that momentum is stored as energy. As you can see, they have 150 max energy, and they gain energy per second. The 4 is just an approximation. We'll have to do that mostly by field. Maybe that'll be way too much. Maybe it'll be too little. When above 100 energy, Squires are capable of leaping to any targeted position within 10 range. So this needs to be manually activated, which, as you can imagine, is going to be a bit of an APM cost. And I also imagine that will reduce the, amongst other things, like the stats of the unit being relatively low in terms of DPS and range, and the fact that they're also, I would imagine, like they only have 40 health, right? So comparatively, the Maverick is planned to have 60 health. If we go with that, these units will actually die quite quickly. But the fact that they can leap, the fact that they have 2 more sight range over the Maverick as of the current numbers, again, we'll math out a lot of that stuff later on, and the fact that we just have a bunch of other ideas in general for things like how the terrain is going to interact with this kind of unit, or how the unit is going to interact with the terrain, and how the battlefields are going to be put together. I really like the idea that the Squire is going to be positioned as a very early harassment option, essentially, while without leaving the infantry focus that the Ansifii are meant to have. Because if you guys read the Ansifii updates to the tech trees, where we mentioned, I'm trying to see, the most powerful of the Ansifii technology manifested through firepower. This paragraph here, the second to last one, discusses, essentially stuff that's like, it manifests as very impressive vehicles and spacecraft, but ultimately they're mostly, as much as they have raw firepower, a good portion of their power budget comes from bringing infantry and production structures to the front lines so that you can reinforce the infantry squads that you have. It's building around all of that infantry focus. What's up, Knight of the Realm? Squire, I assume that's what you're talking about as far as the name goes. So, as far as my understanding of Squire goes, I did look this up prior to it. There's definitely there's an initial mismatch that most people are going to probably pick up on if they're familiar with the term, which is obviously the Squire originally was meant as like almost not really an errand boy, but that's like one way to put it for a knight. So they like carry their shield, or they, will go in and maybe they do have a bit of a scouting role, but for the most part, like, it was used to refer to esquires, right? So it was used to refer to these sort of like people that are in service to a knight, and usually knights, I think, only had one squire to my knowledge, but maybe there were some that had multiple. I guess it probably depends on the individual, but for the most part, I think rank of knight granted you in some empires, some militaries, you were provided a squire. That's my attempt to make it very clear that the Squire plays second fiddle to the Maverick and to some of the other units that you're going to see as infantry. These guys are meant to supplement, and they're not going to carry the shields literally, but the idea of them being able to carry intelligence, carry out a more specialized role for the sake of harassment or distraction or intelligence, or like scouting and stuff, maintaining mastery over a certain area, or at least map control, that sort of thing. There are probably a few other names that might get swapped in instead, and maybe some other unit will actually feel more appropriate for the Squire. Originally, the Squire was going to be a scouting bike, similar to the Vulture, but not really bike. It's more like a rough term for something that's a bit more like an actual vehicle with a sealed cockpit and stuff, because the actual design of the Vulture is really stupid and would never work in any sort of sci-fi setting. But something similar in profile to the Vulture, in terms of it being kind of long, and then also mostly thin and easily able to navigate. I guess you could make a comparison to like those Star Wars things where, I mean, again, these weren't completely sealed cockpit wise, but they had this side. They had these like speeder bikes or whatever that allowed you, which I think Vultures are essentially copied from. Where the stormtroopers were on, but those were just crash into trees and stuff. It's like George Lucas deliberately filmed scenes where the technology that he and his other people had designed was made to look foolish and stupid. I guess that was kind of the point of the whole Forest Moon of Endor thing, but whatever. You get the idea. It's goofy. So yeah, to answer the question about the name, hopefully my explanation as to why Squire, I think, makes sense. But again, this is all super early stuff, and there's a very high likelihood that maybe some other term for like a term that's not an action verb that I can use, called like a runner or something, will make some sense. I also have a little bit of an explanation behind the weapon naming scheme. So if we look at Mason, you've got M2S double bite. And then if you look at Squire, IP1S Binoc, and then if you look at Maverick, it's IA2S Santis. So the names are just whatever I think fits, like double bite or whatever. But 2S is 2 shots, so double shot basically, right? So that means the Santis will be a burst rifle, essentially. It'll shoot twice, at least visually and like audio visually, which is kind of like the Maverick or Marine in Brood War, where you can see that he shoots a burst of like, I think it sounds like 3 or something. The Binoc by comparison is 1S, so that would be single shot. IP is infantry pistol. IA is infantry assault rifle. I guess it could be IAR if I wanted to be super crazy about it. And M is mining. So I'll figure out these like sort of call signs here, but the idea is that you'll have this consistent thing, and it's not just like as far as I can tell, the C10 canister rifle and stuff like that was never consistent, because obviously the Marine is just Gauss rifle, and I figure giving a little bit of like an allegory to modern naming conventions, where it's like, oh, it's an M16 or something. Well, I guess that's not very modern, but you know what I mean. Like human naming conventions, having something similar to that might help a little bit with having the Ansifii feel a bit more relatable as far as their individual units go. And this is probably the only faction where that's even going to be the case. So that even though it seems a little generic in some cases to have a human or human-like faction use like digits and I guess like product codes basically for their rifles, that's actually going to be a consistent feature of the Ansifii and a unique feature to the Ansifii, which I think will in the long run pay off. At the same time, maybe I don't even bother and we just have Santis rifle instead of IA2S Santis. We'll see how that looks. How does it feel to have unlocked more creative freedom by going with your own universe rather than the StarCraft one? Any reflections on noticeable pros/cons so far? There are no cons. The only cons that exist are basically I have to do work, but that's not a con to me. I'm pronogo, not conogo. No, that's not a con to me because it's not like I want to put in the work. I want to make something. So when we consider everything else, it's like, okay, I'm no longer held back by everything else that's out there that's really stupid that Blizzard wrote. I'm no longer held back by having to take the flawed but full of potential setting of StarCraft, remove it from the plot of the campaigns that made no sense, and then write my own plots and rework all of those races. I no longer have to do that. I just make my own stuff. And to be fair, I guess this isn't really a con as far as it goes for this development, but it has resulted in me having zero interest in working on Brood War stuff. I will say that. I have almost no interest whatsoever in working on like Brood War custom maps, or like I'm working on birthday stuff, obviously. Hey, speaking of birthday stuff, it's obviously the birthday of Knight of the Realm. There you go. That's your birthday sound. I practiced that a lot. That's the party popper sound, if anybody knows those. It's like it's not really party popper, but it's like it's the audio version of the Tada reaction. You can clip that and use that. What's up, Jose? What's up, Terran Dominion? And I'll get to Shirk's questions in a second, but yeah. Where was I going with that? It's just way better. It's way better to have your own setting. It doesn't make any sense to do that. Now, I don't think Frost Giant's going to deliver anything of value, to be honest. They're letting Reddit design their game for them. Like, they're not even doing the work for that. So I wouldn't put any hope in. Listen, I think it's kind of crazy to even put your hope in me. So I'll still do my best to deliver upon it. But you kind of want to. At least I've got a track record of producing actual content, or trying to produce actual content. Those Frost Giant guys, they're just from Blizzard, and Blizzard hasn't produced content in years. So yeah, Brood War setting sucks. It's boring, and the Xibalba setting is way better. That's my very unbiased and objective take on the matter, having of course, no involvement in the creation of Xibalba. So hopefully that answered your question, Milestone. I guess the most noticeable benefit, if you will, is just that like I get to imagine so many different settings and so many different like stories that I would never be able to tell in Brood War without the inclusion of original races in the first place. Like without the inclusion of something like the Dalventhos, for example. So the Dalventhos, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it because they were number 18. They were one of the recent Regency editions. These guys are super obscure. They're like hermits. They're reclusive. And they mostly just want to be left alone, but occasionally there will be enemies that encroach upon their territory. And they're mostly living inside virtual reality as a species. Like they've completely left the mortal plane in that sense, the physical plane, and they stick to the virtual reality that they've created for themselves. And that's a theme where, like, if I was trying to do that, I guess I could make a Terran faction or something that was like that, but it would still be Terran instead of being their own thing. And so it would still be more familiar than I would actually want it to be, instead of it feeling very alien and feeling very different. So the other thing that this allows me to do with the Dalventhos specifically is that I could make an entire campaign where you think that you're playing through this legit thing. Like this could go either way. It could be the Ender's Game style where you think it's a training sequence and then it comes to pass that you find out, oh, it was actually real. And it was just like, oh, I thought that battlefield was believable, and I thought my drill instructor was was a little overbearing at times. I thought it was just because that's what he was told to do, but no, it was because I was actually doing it. So you could have that bait and switch. You could have the opposite, like just the sheer creative liberties you can take and the settings that you can have for your stories is way beyond that. Like another example, you can have a Githrovan who's like living through hell for like an entire campaign where he's just down on his luck the whole time, and then it turns out actually it was just madness put in his head by Kolopoazos. Now you need to do more work than just that premise to make it feel good and compelling, because at the end of the day, if it's just oh, by the way, surprise, it was something else, that's not very exciting or compelling. But the idea that you could even do that is like unfathomable in the Brood War universe. You just don't even have the storytelling capabilities for it. You'd have to have like some lunatic Dark Archon or something, and then you just get compared to Blizzard's writing anyway. So like there's just nothing you can do to have anywhere close to the same level of possibilities. And that obviously doesn't even take into account the millions of things I haven't said about it. What does tier 1 tech look like across the factions in broad terms? Will they still be considered super advanced by our terms, even at tech 1? And tier 10 is just supreme beyond all our standards? Or is it more tier 1 looking like us, but 100 years ahead? So I think the way that tier 1 tech will look like is, as far as, I guess you're talking about like Ansifii specifically, but I guess maybe, I can answer this as it pertains to like everybody, basically. So the thing about the technology is that at tier 1, you're mostly going to be dealing with inexpensive, you could say spammable aspects of technology, where like the most expensive stuff you're going to get at tier 1 is like, maybe as an example in Brood War terms, it would be something like 200 minerals and 100 gas or something like that, right? Which is kind of like what you see. I think you get a little bit higher than that with the Panoptus, aka Scout. That's technically tier 1, but that would be like one example. And then, yeah. There's the clip. Here it is. Oh, this is a longer one. Hold on. Wait, is this displayed next to the video somewhere? That's pretty good. I don't know how it is, but good job. You did it. That clip is in Special Bus for the fraud loungers. So, yeah, I think tier 1 tech is going to be like inexpensive stuff. As far as the Ansifii specifically are concerned, yes, they will be very advanced. I don't know about how many hundreds of years into the future. The thing is, like, it's actually a really important question to answer in a conceptual standpoint, because I need to know what I'm targeting for the baseline of technology, because I need to make sure that it's plausible that whatever technology you see the Ansifii use at tier 1 is technology that could compete with other advanced races. That's where I think it's actually a huge benefit that I'm not using humans, because as relatable as Ansifii may end up being, they're still not humans. And so you can still imagine that, because they have different physical capabilities and they have different technology and they have different resources and they live in a different part of the fucking universe, maybe in a different universe, there's a lot of different things there that would be contributed there. But I think that's probably the best way to answer that question, is like essentially try to take stock of a rough concept of everybody's tier 1 and then a rough idea of where their tech will go towards the end, like their max tier tech and some of the stuff in the middle. Just start populating basically different things. And then with every step of that, with every other regency you start adding, you're basically getting a better picture of what the maximum tech of all regencies would look like, and then what the minimum tech of each regency would look like, and try to see if, like, does this make sense that, this guy in a exosuit that runs around with an assault rifle would be able to shoot down like a fighter, a tier 1 fighter from a more advanced civilization. And if you can buy that, I think to some extent you can in Brood War, although some of it is a bit goofy, but like for the most part, that's maybe partially because it's just from so long ago that we just take it for granted. I think for the most part, it's somewhat believable. Like trying to take off any rose-tinted goggles you may have. It's mostly believable, I think. There's some like weird shit like the fire bat. I don't know why you would be using fire. It would have to, I think even in the manual, it says napalm too, or something like that, but I could be wrong. I could be misremembering. But yeah, I don't want to diss Ahmed. Obviously he's a legend, but you definitely want to have some of your own space. Basically, you want to figure out like what makes sense to you and then you share the concept around, which is what I've been doing, and then people just say like, oh, okay. And the best response on this specific subject is that nobody questions it at all, and nobody says, but would that really make sense that, you know, X unit would be able to defeat Y unit from another regency? And if nobody has to ask that question, then you're good, because it's just not even a thought. Like, it's something that only, you know, it's working if nobody notices anything wrong, basically. So hopefully that explained it. I do think it will be significantly more advanced than us, even at tier 1. But that's just because, like, we haven't really gotten to the point where we can, you know, stretch across entire galaxies and stuff. And the Ansifii have, so. And then Terran Dominion mentions a Maverick killing a Zella with an M16. Yeah, when I said M16, it was mostly like the category of weapon or whatever. Like the fact that it's called M16 is like its call sign. I don't even know what you would call that. Again, I called it like a product code, but there's definitely a better term for that. I just don't know what the term is. But if you get that term, it's like if you have a term, a sort of call sign, and then I have a consistent reason and scheme, naming scheme for all of those terms for each gun in the Ansifii arsenal, then you're good. So that should, I think that will help a little bit anyway. So. Well, I definitely, I did write about the resources on the web, on the Xibalba page. There's a section beneath all of the regencies, which probably means nobody's noticing it because of all of the regencies. But right now we've only got 2 universal regencies. I mean resources for all regencies. The exactly, sure. You know what's really funny is, like, this is a complete non sequitur, but lately I've been playing some Arma 3 with the homies, and there's a Mass Effect mod for that game, amongst other things, and they just have the like, they didn't make it so that the stats of the Mass Effect stuff were like ridiculous. They just balanced it as if it was like another gun in the game. So you get these like fully like armored, ironclad aliens running around with like space laser guns, and you can just one-shot them with a conventional assault rifle if you hit their head, which is like, I mean, it's good for gameplay, but it looks very goofy. So you don't, that's like an example of the obvious like cognitive dissonance, immersion breaking you don't want to have in your game, even though that's obviously a mod or whatever. But I think the issue with the whole like resources that can only be interacted by one thing is that they can work insofar as they become an area, like an object that can be denied for other regencies. But it's a permanent object unless you can destroy it or interact with it in some way, even if it's not in the same way. You wouldn't be able to. Basically, it's like this happens in some MOBAs as well. Like an example is in League of Legends, there's a champion called Skarner, and he's a scorpion from made of crystals or something. And one of his reworks resulted in like these gimmick locations on the map existing only when he's on the map. And if he, I think it's he specifically has to take it, but maybe it's also his ally. I don't remember. If he takes it, he moves faster while he's in the area. That's like a giant area around it. But if he doesn't take it, then he doesn't move faster. And like technically that can be interacted with insofar as the enemy team can deny him, but they can't do anything about the actual area. It's not like they can like attack it to turn it off for a minute or something, or he has, or like make him have to rebuild it somewhere else or whatever. It's just like a fixed location on the map that he can do nothing in. So, or nobody else can do anything about. That would be my biggest fear about implementing some sort of resource that is only available for one regency or a couple of regencies, in that you can technically deny it, but it's almost like kind of forcing your hand if it's really impactful, because you have to go and try to contest it. And it's like, instead of earning the, it would be kind of similar to having an expansion in like a really far away place where from a level design perspective that can actually be bad because you're not earning the value of that place, you're just slapping an expansion there. Like maybe it's a really annoying place to navigate to, but you have to because there's a high yield expo. Like it would be kind of the same thing, except in this case you can't even use it, only your opponent can, or vice versa. So to me, it just feels like that would be pretty difficult. If you have to ask yourself what problem are you potentially solving, or what mechanic are you introducing? Like, what is the reason why you're doing that? And if the reason why you're doing it is like, encouraging area denial or map control in a persistent area around the map, I think the general mechanics of the game should probably do that. Because there is the concern that maybe there's regencies out there that are going to turtle easier than other regencies. But there should always be some, push and pull. And I think upstarts actually already act as these sort of arms race resources that you can exploit to some degree or another, in some manner or another, be it through negotiation or just subjugation or just execution even, and stealing their stuff. So my roundabout answer to that is it's not really something I've thought about recently, just because there's stuff that every regency can interact with in the same way that, or in similar enough ways that it doesn't feel like it's a completely parallel system, that I think it would work out just fine this way. Yes, yellow magmite. I don't know if it'll be yellow. I don't actually know what the basic color will be. Like, I'm kind of tempted to make magmite blue and hypervials green, but just because it's like, oh, people will know if they played Brood War. These are kind of similar things. But then there's another part of me that's like, yeah, but you have to make it different. And I'm like, okay, I'll make the magmite green and the hypervials blue. Different. Yes. Unique. Spoiler, not very unique. But maybe I do that anyway, just as like, we're keeping the same colors. But I think the resources will probably, instead of just being reskinned when they're high yield, they will probably look very different. Like, similar enough to know that they're resource nodes, but different enough to know that regardless of their color, they are clearly high yield in some other way. And that way, I can actually have them inherit color from the terrain that they're placed on, which will increase this immersion from the perspective of actually playing in an environment instead of the resources. Like StarCraft 2 tried to make resources blend in, but for the most part, they just changed what they were contained in or something. If they were on some artificial area, they would like give them pens like pigs. It's pretty stupid. But I think if you just make it so that they blend in with the environment, and like, yeah, I guess for man-made or constructed artificial terrain, you have it look like they were delivered there, so to speak, and they look all fancy and machined. Then yeah, I guess I can see that being one way to do that. But for the most part, I feel like there's untapped ideas about, instead of doing that, like maybe that's one variant of the resource node's visual appearance. But I like the idea instead of them being like the resources. This is one of the reasons why when I'm thinking about like, hold on, let me look at a scenario I've made recently. I think Cellbound has the crevices. So if I'm looking at Cellbound, right, like, I really like the crevices here, even though they don't really show a lot of depth. Because the reason I like these is because it gives the impression that the resource nodes are actually changing what the map looks like. They're actually interacting with the terrain and changing what it is in some ways. So I don't know really how much like other people see the same sort of thing in that. But to me, it's just way more interesting to consider the idea that you've got terrain that is being manipulated by the resources, just like you're going to be able to manipulate terrain with explosions and other effects. And that being like, oh, if there's significantly more like eruptions from the crust of the earth, or like they're erupting through the plating even that's on the floor, and revealing maybe the dirt that the plating was put on or something. Like, you could imagine stuff like that happening all over the place. And that would make it feel like they're part of the world instead of slapped on top. And technically they are just slapped on top, but you don't want them to feel that way. So I would say that's probably one of the most, that's probably one of the angles that I'll take in general. I guess I can write that down as a matter of fact, because I go to ideas here and we say resources that, we'll just say resources noticeably erupt from the earth below. Okay, I'll know what the context of that is when I look at it later. And yes, as you so kindly point out, Terran Dominion, just make them more epic. Okay, I'll close this map now. I haven't even updated it in a while. I was working on all of these like little scenario maps and stuff, but as soon as I started working on, I was telling this when I was answering Milestone's question, I was like, I started working on the Xibalba regencies and figuring out ideas for campaigns for Xibalba. Maybe we'll do some campaign planning at some point, actually. I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, either way, the idea that I had was like, oh, we've got, you know, we've got all these really fun ideas that I want to do, but the graphics don't exist yet or whatever. Like we don't have the engine in such a state that I can start working on RTS maps just yet. That'll probably be before the end of this month. But I don't want to do fucking scenarios in Cosmonarchy anymore, like the Brood War mod, because why would I want to do that? That's not epic enough. All right, let's head back to the visual design portion of the stream. I am fairly concerned, or not concerned, fairly convinced that I am 100% going to be able to write a lot about this stuff, and it will be useful for the birthday boy himself, Knight of the Realm. I started on this before the stream, but I am pretty sure there's going to be some different elements. I think I'll have to specify that some of what's here is going to apply, particularly with the construction, like the nature of the physical appearance of the construction materials. Some of it will apply to units, some of it will apply to structures, and some of it will apply to both. So it's going to be important to specify between that. I don't think that's true, Knight of the Realm, because there's like 30 RTS games out there. That's probably an exaggeration. There's like 10 or more RTS games out there that we have extracted resources from. So it would definitely be possible. It would just look really weird. I think we have at least one faction's worth of assets. And the other thing is we can just like scale up and recolor a bunch of other stuff if we need to for like total placeholders. But I don't know when DF is starting on the... he might have already started and just not mentioned it. But I don't know when he's started on the Macrolon light mech. But if he gets that in, then like theoretically it would be possible for him to take the same rig with the same animations, add a couple of things or change a couple of things about the mesh, and then just export it out as a new unit, basically, as like another placeholder graphic. And... like, I don't think that would be... I don't know if we would use completely new meshes from a 3D modeling perspective for other Macrolon mechs, but I feel like they would all require a large portion of changes from whatever base you start with. Like, some of them are going to be completely made from scratch. Others are going to be like, okay, you can take it, but you got to expand this, and you got to, like, change the way that it walks. You got to add, like, 2 more legs to it or some shit. Like, whatever the case may be. So there's definitely going to be some copy and paste, some editing and whatnot. But the main idea that I have here is that like it will not be that difficult to get a lot of placeholders out of just one mesh. You can just change a little bit about it here and there. I mean, I would like at least basic animations for readability's sake, but yeah. I don't think that texturing is like, or coloring is the biggest part of the modeling process, but I could ask DF if there's some corner he would be able to cut to get a lot of placeholder assets out in a short amount of time. I definitely think the biggest thing is like getting concept art. That's actually going to be deceptively more useful. Like I've already said, it's super useful, but it's deceptively more useful than you might think because of how many placeholders I can churn out. I can convert like one mesh into, and each unique mesh is going to require a unique set of concept art. So yeah, DF is modeling the first party unit assets and structures, I imagine. Although I haven't asked about him about that specifically, but we're going to be starting on the Macrolon. He's going to be starting on Macrolon pretty soon. I'll mute for the siren. All right, I think it's on the tail end, unless there's another one coming. So yeah, I don't know about a graphics stream because he's in Canada, and I'm pretty sure they all have data caps. But we'll see what he says. That would be pretty cool, though. I actually have been playing around with Blender, but unless DF is like overworked about something, or I'm just so ahead of all of the other work that I have to do, I don't think I'll be working too heavily on that specifically. Just because it's definitely it's something I need to put a lot more hours in to be basic, have like the basic amount of competence at, because it's a very technical process of learning all the keyboard shortcuts and shit. The interface is horrible. It's very overloaded. It did, on a positive side, it did give me a lot of ideas for how to avoid those pitfalls when making our editor, but yeah. I can actually, I don't know if you have already found stuff, but there is, if I take this and this and send, I can DM you these. These were two videos that helped me out that I'm like slowly sifting through with regards to all the tips, and they're helping me out with some of the stuff that I've been doing. So, like, I actually started Blender just because I got randomly got recommended one of those videos, the longer of the two, and I just like watched. I started setting it up as he was going through all the setup stuff for it. So, pretty good. Gets you familiar with a bunch of stuff. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the same guy for both videos. So as far as the visual design is concerned for Ansifii, I have written down here that their colors are a mix of bright chromatics, which would be like, obviously, chrome, silver, maybe just regular old gunmetal, although that's a bit darker. And then a wide range of blue tones. I'm not sure if blue tones are going to be their core or not. That's what I've written down so far, obviously, but I don't actually know if I want to go with that. Because I wanted to kind of like imply that they obviously have a lot of, as you could say, confidence in themselves, and they believe themselves to have a lot of potential, especially compared to other regencies. And so I kind of wanted to like imply that whole, obviously supremacy has very bad connotations, but you get the idea. Oh shit! One sec. My sweat towel was too far away. But yeah, the idea that you have a faction that literally their skin color is what they is the color of what they bring into battle. Um, it's not exactly a very palatable idea in today's standards, but I don't really care about that. So. I think them carrying that in is emblematic of their self assuredness and their feeling of, again, I guess supremacy doesn't really make that much sense because they recognize the other regencies that have a lot of power, and they're not like thinking that they're not delusional. It's more that they think that they have the potential to supersede them anyway, right? So they have like pride, I guess you could say. So the pride in their own people and in their own culture is what is like represented by their armor. Um, at the same time, obviously in a more realistic sense, individual nations would have their own colors, and that's where I guess you would just call those player colors. So instead of just a wide range of blue tones, that would probably be the default. Where or like the bigger or the biggest nation maybe has blue tones or something, and then like maybe that's the regency that you get introduced to is like they're the ones with blue tones and maybe teal tones or something, shades of cyan. While the other regencies out there, or the other nations of Ansifii out there, are a wide variety of other colors. So I can say a wide range of colors. I will say emblematic colors based on their nation. Faded reds and oranges serve as accents for critical components. This is like a very common thing where you'll see, I guess you usually see yellow and red, but it's like bright colors that are immediately noteworthy and say like, oh, this is dangerous in some way. Be careful. Stuff like that will be used on anything that has like a fuel tank or like that. That'll probably be part of the color for the that'll probably be part of the coloring for the Mason's backside, where that part of the Mason exosuit extends out a little bit to cover the life support systems, and those will blow up if ruptured. So there will probably be some sort of like a couple of warning stripes or something. And those will be faded reds and faded oranges. So those will be like nice accents for being able to tell what's going on at a glance about like what's a critical component. But the whole rest of it will, like a large portion of it will be the bright chromatics, which will contrast well with anything else that's chromatic. It's probably going to be a little bit more on the darker side, and then the nation specific colors, which is just player color. So I think a lot of their units will have predominantly player color actually. I don't know if that'll be a consistent aspect. It would be nice, I guess, for that to be a consistent aspect. But. So their technology is comprised of several individually machined parts with modularity in mind, facilitates battlefield repairs and multipurpose components. This is going to be tricky because basically it means that the meshes are probably going to be somewhat complex, and we do need simple detail for RTS. But my basic idea was that like every individual component, say like an arm, like it would be you'd be able to split that up into like, you know, forearm, and then like hand, obviously individual finger digits, stuff like that, and then obviously like the joints that connect them and whatnot. So any sort of like mechanized arm like that, or something that's meant to be part of an exosuit that goes over an arm, those would be individually developed so that you could easily slot them in and out if like one specific part of the suit got damaged or the mech got damaged. And the other thing is that they'd be able to use this modularity to build a similar kind of vehicle or mech or spacecraft that instead of having this armament has this armament, or instead of having, you know, this kind of propulsion has this kind of propulsion. And, you know, within reason, a lot of the interplay there would allow somewhat similar and like a unified design ethic for the vehicles and spacecraft and even infantry suits, while still being obviously like different enough that they seem very obviously different in terms of the kind of units that they are. And we have a nice easy get out of jail free card for larger infantry units, where instead of being in an exosuit, they're in bona fide power armor that is like, you know, an extra 25% bigger than them or something, instead of just being a little bit. So that'll be like a nice way to show the scale of like the power and tech tier of a specific unit. video paused. Did you know? For Ansifii, yeah, there's a high likelihood that some higher tier workers are going to be very different than conventional worker designs. I think all of the higher tier workers will be like that, actually. I've talked a little bit about how, for example, um, the higher tier Cathethron workers are going to be flying. A lot of higher tier workers will be flying in general. Yeah, and that's another thing is there's going to be some workers that specifically can, harvest resources faster. There's going to be some workers that can harvest or can construct buildings faster, and there's going to be some workers that just maybe move around faster than the others, so they still equate to faster mining time overall, like return time. So yeah, there's a ton of different levers we can pull with individual tech ups for workers that will make the economy a lot more interesting than just how many workers do you have. It'll be like we'll probably need for like the observer tool or something. We'll probably need some way to say like to estimate the income per minute or income per second or something, um, and show that instead of just worker counts because each worker is not a fixed amount anymore. Some workers are going to be much higher. That a tool like that would actually be really useful for designing the precise, like fine tuning the worker values themselves, because obviously you actually want some parity between workers in general in terms of harvesting rates. And if you don't have them, then you need to know that so that you can either fix that if it's a problem that you want to fix through the worker itself, or reduce the tier one costs or something. You know what I mean? So like if there's going to be a regency that harvests slower than other regencies, they need to have reasonable costs associated with getting a higher tier worker out so that they can fix that problem. Or getting to the point where they have achieved critical mass of workers so that it's not as much of a problem. Yeah, maybe that's something I would check out as far as videos go. I don't know if you will be able to find it necessarily, but stuff like that is pretty useful. Last stream, people mentioned I should check out Dynamo Dream because it's like it's like some futuristic thing. I started watching the first episode. It's a bit slow, and unfortunately, since it's on YouTube, maybe I can download it. Let's just say YouTube is not actually used for watching video because everything is in fucking TV range. It was also very obvious where stuff was green screened in, which is kind of unfortunate because that's like the whole show so far. Yeah, no pressure or anything, but if you find it. I mean, some of them will be. The thing is, like, not every higher tier thing is going to result in, like, larger scale necessarily. That is one way we can obviously show power. But it's something that I'm a bit hazy on right now as far as, like, what the higher tier units would look like. And that's actually something else that I can mention here is, like, we probably need some sort of, like, visual differences. We could say indications of tech tier. We definitely need. I'm trying to figure out like so everything else, right? I already have an idea of what I need for the tech tree path or the defining traits. Like I have an outline for a lot of this stuff. I don't really have an outline for what I'm supposed to do for visual design by comparison. That stuff is a bit different. If I go the route of I mean, right, I basically just have to free write until I feel like I've got a useful outline or a useful draft, something that does the job of what I need to do and describes what it needs to describe, and then I can start to break apart its base elements. But like so far, I've just got colors, which is important, technology, like the general idea of what their units are made of. So I guess we could say they're units. let's see, the equipment of their infantry and we'll just say their infantry equipment and vehicles and spacecraft are comprised of several individual machine parts. So that way we've specified that their buildings are probably going to look a bit different. I don't know how much of that will be consistent for buildings, actually. Because obviously it would be nice if everything that they had was kind of like that. But I feel like it would also be kind of cool to have more prefab structures. But I guess the prefab idea could be used as like an architectural aspect for other regencies too. Maybe one way to describe the Ansifii Regency stuff is actually to take a page out of that Dynamo Dream or whatever you said. They were very like that replicant film. What is it called? Blade Runner. They're very Blade Runner-y, like very grimy. And I don't know how like useful or the one thing that always got me about those grimy future like dystopian aesthetics is that it never really they're by definition they don't have as many resources as we do now. Like things have taken a turn for the worst. But even though they don't have as many resources, they seem to squander the ones that they do have on stuff that is not going to actually change their fate well. You know what I mean? Like, it looks like it's not practical. If we do like, I guess if we do a sci-fi tower, we'll take a look at this because we looked up sci-fi architecture earlier. This is very clearly like a turbo fantasy type thing. This could be cool for some sort of like Rosellium stuff, I guess. I'll open that up. This is a little bit closer to the idea that I was talking about earlier, where it's this is a little bit more Blade Runner-y with like the fog and the dreary atmosphere. I think the metals that can change between liquid and solid are basically the Omindir from the Omindris Regency. So I wouldn't necessarily want to step on those toes necessarily. But I guess if the tech doesn't resemble serpents, then it's not really going to be as similar. It will behave in a similar way, but it's a little bit different in that sense. So yeah, I feel like that's probably possible. I would have to decide what I would actually want to do about that. So the trouble that I've had with the Ansifii, well, not really, it's not really trouble, but if I were to translate Terran to Ansifii, there's a lot of mismatch. And I'll give you some examples. So like a lot of the shared technology would just be individual units in other regencies that are not Terran at all. Like Cohort would probably be closer to like something from the Bithran tier or the Nadarasatha or something. I would say Aspirant could be like Embraceet, or maybe even Githrovan, just straight up Githrovan, although obviously it's inspired by the Dracodon, which would probably be more like Githrovan. If we look to like Blackjack, that's going to be a Dakret for the Mackerel Das. We look to Siren. I guess this could be, since it's an infantry unit, right? Like that could easily be something for Ansifii. I'm not sure if the same kind of gameplay mechanic would benefit them as much. Claymore is a bit too... I guess it could be something that it's Ansifii tech. But the Claymore was always a little bit more like something that should be on the Iron Foundry. I just never moved it there because I didn't have anything else for the future station unlock, mostly. We looked at Striga. That's probably something that could probably be, but it wouldn't be teleporting. It would be leaping. It would be like a leaping melee infantry unit. I already have plans for that. So that feels a little bit different. It wouldn't have the same repulsion either. So Very different unit, I guess. So I guess the Striga then would be something else if it was anything at all. Luminary definitely doesn't seem very Ansifii. Tarask and Anti-Chthon are more Zergy than Terran anyway, with the Tarask probably being Orlithray, like an infested Orlithray unit or something. Anti-Chthon I already know is not a Rasatha tech. So like that's the thing, is that's just a shadow tech tree, and like one or maybe two of the units here could be theoretically used for Ansifii, the Siren being the one like that definitely could be, although it would change a bit. And we look to the other tech trees, like, or the branches, I guess. More of these units could be used, but like there's not going to be a conventional cleric the same way. I don't think the shaman will be Ansifii tech. I think that'll mostly be like Rosellium or something. They're probably not going to have a flamethrower unit. At least if they have a flamethrower unit, it's going to be a lot more mobile than the Hurakan is. So it'll feel like a very different unit. Cyprian's that like longer range unit. I guess they'll probably have something that's kind of like a Cyprian in terms of it having longer range than the Maverick. I don't think they'll have a bike or anything. They'll have some sort of cockpit, like fully sealed unit. I was talking about that earlier. But it won't lay mines, so it won't really be the same unit at all. Cyclops and Goliath, I don't know if they even do walkers, really. They're probably going to do more rolling and hovering. No, I think rolling and treaded units are probably going to be their vehicles for the most part. And then their fighters, I guess you could say Wraith and Gorgon, although I don't think they'll have Cloak as like a major feature necessarily. But Trojan for sure is fine because it's just a transport. They use a lot of transports. They'll have like an APC in tier 1 probably for armor. A land transport. Gorgons, I guess, yeah, that's probably fine. They probably wouldn't have the same passive, but the passive is not very well utilized in current builds. So what I'm getting at is like a lot of this stuff wouldn't actually transition as cleanly to Ansifii as you might think. So yeah, that is something that I haven't considered to what degree I'm going to do. Like that's actually a question I also have to answer in general is like what do you, how much of the Ansifii, how much of any given faction or regency is going to take from another regency? Like how much of their, how much inspiration is going to be taken? And what is that sort of, what does that look like? I don't know that the Ansifii will necessarily do that. While they do like have a certain amount of respect for the other regencies, they also really want to do things their own way. And so they might have a like you said, their take on technology. They would obviously see the value in reverse engineering something, but I don't know that it would be recognizable in the same way. It would almost be like something you could infer upon watching it that like, oh, yeah, they did this. The other trouble with doing it for something like the Omindris is that that regency isn't even going to be in the game for maybe a year or more. So probably longer, I guess, but like just as a rough estimate. So the Ansifii, a retail regency, would have like a tech, some tech that technically those regencies exist in the universe. So it's not like a plot hole or anything. It's not like they come into existence or start doing stuff in that moment. And I guess you could have them like, obviously they'll show up as upstarts at some point too, before they show up as a proper regency. But it's definitely possible to go the slave route or the repurposed technology route. But I personally feel like it's actually better to make as many units as you can out of the regency itself. And I know for a fact some regencies, like the Makral Das, for example, are not going to have room for other races in their stuff. Like, yes, they will have technology inspired by other races and other regencies, but primarily, like, they already have 3 very distinct tech branches, and I think, like, even though I could add a 4th, I don't know how distinct it would actually end up being, and I feel like it would probably just muddy the waters, because they actually have a well-rounded plan for their tech structure already. And I have that well-rounded plan for a couple of different regencies now. So I don't think that there would actually be that much room for shared technology in the same way. I did shared technology in Cosmonarchy, in part as an experiment, and in part because I was really interested in seeing how similar or identical combat rules would be used by completely different compositions surrounding it. And that was like mostly the experimental side. The other aspect is with one unit entry, I could actually satisfy, a unit for 2 races. So I was getting double the value out of it theoretically. Not really, because I had to make like the production facility different from each regency or each race, but you get the idea. Like the point of it was more to circumvent engine limitations as well as to experiment with this idea. And I think while it was overall a net positive in terms of number of options that players had for gameplay and composition, the other component is that they did muddy the waters a bit. And it didn't matter as much in Brood War because the setting wasn't my own, and Zerg were already known to infest stuff, so it didn't beggar belief that like Terrans would repurpose Protoss technology, and Protoss would hire Terran mercenaries in a pinch, and Zerg and Protoss would somehow form a union or something, considering that was even the Overmind's whole plan. So like there was some lore that pointed in the direction that, yeah, okay, you could make some sense out of it. For me, I would very much err on the side of caution about doing something like that, and it probably wouldn't be a consistent element. At least it wouldn't be as consistently obvious that it's inspired by or literally is, a member of another regency or something. Ember Seat might be a nice exception to that because their whole thing is that they're made up of a melting pot. So some of their mercenaries, like there's going to be like a disgraced Keltar mercenary that's like a total berserker on the battlefield and stuff. I already know that. And they're going to be like wearing completely different armor and, sound very different than a traditional Keltar. So stuff like that, there will be examples of stuff like that specifically for the Ember Seat. But that's like almost their whole thing. So it makes a bit more sense there. And those units will obviously be like dedicated to a specific thing, right? So they will still be very different than their original regency. Like the Keltar mercenary is going to be very different in terms of combat role, and even if it's a similar combat role, it's going to have very different stats and different personality to it than a Keltar equivalent for that regency. What's up, you? How you doing? Now, the good news is because we have 100 units per regency on average, there is a lot of real estate to play with. But I would say this is almost like I don't necessarily want to fill up part of any, even 5% or something, which would equate to literally 5 units, if I don't have to. If I can make an entire regency's tech tree out of just that regency, I think that's actually better overall. And so it's definitely a challenge. And some of them will still end up being inspired in some way anyway. But that's like some of the ideas that I've been thinking about. You just woke up. Dude, how could you? Yeah, I think using unconventional melee to pad the combat roll is interesting, but I want to experiment with regencies that don't have short range, just like or don't have short range is maybe a bit of a stretch because there's 100 units. So a minimal approach to short range stuff. I also want to experiment with a minimal approach to long range stuff. Like in some cases, that'll be Ansifii. So I want to try that. I want to see what that looks like because I think that will lend to very different play styles. Although, like that's the main issue that I have with it potentially muddying the waters in terms of the racial thematics, the Regency thematics, because anything that's like a Regency specific playstyle or strategy, I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to do a bunch of other playstyles or strategies if you're picking that Regency, but you are picking a Regency that has specific strengths and weaknesses. And if you start to be like, oh, you can kind of pad those with some other Regency, it feels a little like not necessarily a cop-out, but to me it feels like it's weaker than finding a way to allow you to circumvent those limitations without actually just building something you don't have normally or whatever. So if you're in Ansifii and you don't have long range, I don't want you to circumvent the fact that you don't traditionally have long range, right? I don't want you to circumvent the fact that you don't have long range by building an artillery unit and justifying it by like, oh, it's like an artillery unit from another regency, or it's inspired by technology from another regency, because that makes you feel like not Ansifii at that point. Whereas I would prefer to be able to say, okay, we don't have long range, but we do have a bunch of dudes and women that can jump, and they will jump onto the enemy, and that's epic. And that's how we solve that problem. I like that approach to it generally more because it keeps the thematics consistent and also forces you to think about like clever ways that the Regency would understand their own limitations and try to work around them. Now, obviously, they are actually going to have some artillery. That was like an extreme example of like probably something that they're not going to have. But it won't be very common, and it won't be their primary role anyway. It's not like when I say artillery, I should specify that they are going to have some ways to siege down structures, but I don't even know if it'll be from a far away range. Like their version of artillery might be like a literal battering ram vehicle or something that just tanks a bunch of damage and still is able to defeat buildings, which still will behave very differently than artillery, but function in the same anti-building way potentially. So that might be one way that they do it, because that's an interesting concept that I actually haven't really seen done before, unless you count like the Ultralisk or something. So I'm thinking a bit more about the visual indications of tech tiers, and I'm thinking like maybe we could start out as a general rule with less team color on the. Well, see, I'm kind of torn on this, right? On some degree, to some degree in the early game, it's actually important to see more, like to instantly recognize team color. Because you need to be able to say like, oh, that's that guy's unit instead of somebody else's. But I'm thinking also, Okay, think about it like this. We could make it so that units start out with a lot of team color, and they slowly lose a little bit in terms of percentage of their texture over time as they get higher up in the tech tier. But I kind of wanted the inverse, where you'd see more. Well, I guess that doesn't really make as much sense anyway, though, because there's going to be higher scale units, like bigger units, the higher you go. So you're going to see more team color in terms of surface area, but maybe less percentage-wise or something anyway. So that's probably fine. But yeah, I think. Oh, that's actually. I just got reminded. I should note this down. Discord chat restream. Okay. I wanted to set that up. Chat section for the fraud lounge. Actually, I'm not sure how. I would probably have to fucking deny certain people access to that. They would just start spamming words that I cannot say on YouTube. That's not allowed. Can't do that. I guess we could make it so that the chromatics get darker as the tech gets higher. I'm trying to think of like some unifying theme that like when you look at Ansifii, you know it's Ansifii, but there's some element of it. Maybe, okay, instead of it being darker, because I think that will conflict too much with other that are gonna, like other regencies that are gonna have dark chromatics, like the Nadarasatha, for example. I think instead we'll say that the faded reds and oranges, which are serving as accents, those will probably get, maybe those will get a bit brighter or something, but for the most part, they would get more numerous. So more of the surface area of the unit would be covered in that. in those accents, which is sort of like warning your enemies more than it's warning you as the owner of the technology. But the idea that like, oh, this unit has like maybe 3 stripes on it instead of 2. That's 3. That means it's tier 3. Amount of water. I should have gotten 3 cups. So, all right, we'll say the faded accent colors. Additional stripes of the faded accent colors denote more expensive and dangerous Ansifii technology. We obviously need a... Oh no, this isn't going to be... It's not going to be like stripes or accents across all factions. It's more like every regency has their own way of indicating that there's higher tier tech at play. So, like the Nadarasatha might start out with surprisingly bright units or something, and then they get darker the higher tier they are, as like a very quick example. That probably won't be the case. But that's like one way you could imagine. Like there's going to be a unique way, essentially, to instantly know at a glance, like the approximate tech tier of the unit. So I'm not interested in making it like every unit has the stripes or whatever. That would obviously not work. But I like the idea of finding a way to have a consistent sort of guide, visual guide, some sort of visual language. So we have the stripes of the faded accent colors, and patterns, I guess. Okay, we'll just work it into this paragraph actually with more expensive and dangerous Ansifii technology having additional stripes and patterns of these accent colors. I'm not sure about the modularity in mind relating to structures. I was going back and forth on that idea. Oh yeah, and that's actually when we were looking at these images. So I do want the sci-fi stuff to be a bit more round. I am searching for tower though, so that's not really where I'm going to get. I guess we could say compound. And I'm getting compound bow, which is a classic. That looks not sci-fi, actually. Dumb. All right, what if we did barracks, I guess? I don't know. Probably just get a bunch of Brood Wars stuff. Oh, actually, we aren't. That's crazy. Yeah, I guess I'd probably get higher quality stuff. Hey, they even call this one modular. It's a sign. It could be interesting to have their structures be kind of like long on one side. That would even match the Terran, the direction I was going for Terran stuff, which is pretty cool. Apparently there's some from Anno 2070 I wasn't aware of. Okay, so you said art station. Oh, I have to start deleting ads, SMH. Oops. All right, we're doing sci. I don't know if I do sci-fi as that. Okay, we'll say maybe compound will actually work here. No, I just get compound bow. What is this? Ah, these ones are generally taller, it looks like. Yeah, I feel like building is too vague. We're going to get a lot of hits with that, but maybe we'll find something. That's too basic. This looks like an Ember Seat facility, to be honest. This is like... a bit ramshackle. Hey, look, this is a sci-fi RTS building. I don't know what color, fucking art style that is, but... Oh, he tried to make something for Heroes of the Storm. You know, my favorite RTS. These are much more sprawling. More like towers. Train maintenance hall. I like how for sci-fi building I got a boat from ages ago. Yeah, okay. I think longer than where was the thing that I just picked out earlier? Yeah, something that's a little bit longer than it is wide probably fits a lot for this. Futuristic. Okay, I didn't think about that. What is this text? Why have they done this? Jesus. So it looks like it almost looks like one of those Dawn of War barracks in a way, where they have the same concept where something drops in that looks completely different than everything else, and then gets like, well, I don't actually know if that's what this is, but the central structure that's taller doesn't actually look like it belongs with the rest of it. But otherwise, this is a little bit more on the longer side in terms of its profile. Okay, we'll say I feel like since we were talking, so we're on the subject of like trying to decide what to take from Terran. I like the idea of, instead of having add-ons, you can build extra parts to a structure. I guess it would kind of be like an add-on, but the thought is that that extra part to the structure is more like another structure instead of it being something different. So the one trouble is I don't really want to have liftoff for Ansifii. I think it would work best for some other regency probably. And then if you look at something like if you have a mechanic where you're adding on to a structure somehow, it does feel a little weird to say you can do that but not allow you to relocate the structure itself. So I am aware of that. Like, that's basically the main reason why add-on liftoff exists, is because add-ons exist. It also just is a mechanic, but primarily it was there so that if you built an add-on somewhere, you could do something a little different. So yeah, I feel like the problem that I'm having with this is it just seems pretty difficult to, like, the add-on stuff specifically just seems a little tough to justify if we don't have that. But I still wanted the idea of that modularity coming in, not just from a visual design ethic, but also from gameplay. So, like, basically we need to make it so that whatever the add-on replacement mechanic is, if you don't have liftoff as part of your like Regency specific thing, then you need to be able to do something else to relocate. Which could be that you just transport structures with large transports. I know that's already going to be a thing anyway. Because their top tier tech is going to be able to carry production structures. You'll even be able to build production structures inside it, so or on top of it. So that will be a thing. Like they're they're like oversized tanks and stuff. They're assault platforms. So I guess theoretically you could just make it so that transports are able to pick up buildings and then move them around. That could be kind of interesting as another way to expand your productivity. So, like, as your add-on protocol, you could add on something to unlock new units, or you could add on another facility, like a literal copy of the, like if it's a barracks, you add on another barracks. And maybe that's even what it would be, actually. I don't know. But that mechanic might be a little too arcane for the first Regency, too, so I'll think about that a little bit more. I have to actually look up what oblong even... What is the definition of oblong? Yeah, okay, that is actually the case, I think. I do like the idea of continuing the epic saga of having, what do you call it? You probably have a lot of people who are like, I don't want to have to wall my base off. I think it was a little goofy the way they did it in StarCraft 2. Because they basically just made there have no nuance associated with structures. Like, I think Zerg couldn't wall properly, and every other race could, which is really weird. I just don't really see much value in that. So, Knight of the Rum suggests this for female armor for Ansifii. I think if you tone down the whole cup thing for breasts, that's probably fine. It seems appropriate. I'm not even like saying to tone it down from a prudish standpoint. It's more like it's just not as necessary for them. So I think if you just, yeah, if you make it a little bit more subtle, this is appropriate. Like, it's not as ridiculous as a lot of other female armor usually is. So I think that's actually fairly solid. This probably wouldn't be a belt. I think they're sort of, so they have pistols and stuff. I was writing the description for the Squire, and I mentioned that, let's see, where's the heavy pistol they place in a hip holster when not in combat. That would just be part of the suit itself. The exosuit itself would have a holster for that, probably on their right hip, because they'd be right hand dominant, generally speaking. So, yeah, that would be, instead of it being like a more like an add-on the way that this has a belt, it would just be part of the suit because it's a little bit more modular in that sense. But yeah, I think other than that, it's pretty solid. Obviously, they're a lot wider, broader shoulders than humans, but besides that obvious difference, yeah, that seems fine. Just was writing that down for future reference. Okay. So we know structures are going to be machined with more large parts compared to the vehicles and stuff, which makes sense. I guess spacecraft would also be machined, like large spacecraft would probably be used in a similar way, or done in a similar way. So I think I'll leave that there for now. I don't actually know if there's anything else that I would want to do yet, but as far as the Ansifii are concerned. So I'm gonna pivot over to working a bit on the Avot, and when I am done with that, I suppose we'll just take stock of what's left and maybe figure out what else we're doing. So yeah. I shall return in a moment to get some more water and use the bathroom and all that. BRB. Hi. Okay, see you later, homie. So the Avot, number 20. I didn't really explore this very explicitly when I talked about the Avot attacking physical law with their very existence. The I think the most obvious way this is going to be the case is the Avot are basically going to be like perpetual motion machines, except they're energy entities. They're not really. I did mention perpetual motion entities. They break natural law in that sense, where they're fully renewable or whatever. Yeah, Loler, I just put this up yesterday, I think. This is the final one for now, unless I get some really banging ideas at a later date. But I was thinking about like figuring out maybe some more information I could slap together for these guys. Probably a couple of things that would come to mind. I've also kind of hinted at the whole Star Breach thing. I think I need to elaborate a bit more on the enchanting your enemies and allies thing with your rubble. Because right now it's just an AoE effect. But I feel like it'll probably do better if you have to stand on the rubble in order to benefit from it. So it's like an AoE, but in a very small radius around it. That way it's a very like specific thing, which would be pretty cool, I think. So I guess I should just specify that. Say all combatants that stand on the wreckage. There you go. I guess that's fine. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that really stands out to me as needing more elaboration. Besides their visuals, obviously. That's very vague currently. Because part of it is like... So I've described it as like warping time and space, or physical space at least. Where is it? Return to their place of origin, a catastrophic star breach that warps physical space with its very presence. So this is just a visual thing in my current planning, but I didn't really specify that. So I guess we could say that appears to warp physical space. With the star breaches being designed the way that they are, it feels to me like... Well, okay, with the evotion structures in general being designed the way they are, it feels like there is an element of very specific area denial where obviously evotion armies are going to want to like riposte any attacks, and like if there's a structure that's about to go down, they actually get and the enemy can't get like close to the distance. Yeah, actually, the more I think about that, that mechanic change to make it so that you have to be standing on the rubble, it naturally improves the value of destroying a large structure because you get larger amounts of rubble. It naturally makes it so that if you're uh, if you're a longer range regency or you're using longer range units, you don't have the same likelihood of being able to use it. It becomes more of a defender's advantage, I think, in general. And it also has that element of if you are a scrap recycling regency, like Rosellium or Nadarasatha or Thruck or one of those types, right? Or if you have like a specialist from another regency that does something with that, that actually engages with this rubble in a very different way where you can deny that resource from your opponent, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of interplay there, which I actually really like. I think it's really cool to have the, like, I will admit, I was kind of on the fence about us pushing the corpse interaction and rubble interaction as much as I have with the conceptual stuff. But the more I think about it, like, the more value there is because we're building so many individual concepts that interact with it, and the corpses themselves will always behave the same. Like, I guess theoretically you could have a regency that deploys some tech that like makes the corpses persist or something, but I probably wouldn't do that. It doesn't really seem like a very compelling idea, and I don't really know how else you would it would even be possible to gimmick the corpses themselves. So, yeah, I think it's probably fine. Yeah, I'm sort of scanning this, and I still don't really see. So I did talk about conservative base layouts, expansion attempts being taken by the bold and the sure, which is a nice line I like. I did mention a few times that leaving the structures intact for too long will almost certainly result in insurmountable opposition, but I feel like I need to rephrase this because this implies that there's some sort of like gaining strength aspect to them, which I don't think is really. It's more that they're regency that are totally fine with not attacking for the opening 5 minutes, and like they can choose to attack sooner than that if they want to, but they're also totally fine scaling up in peace, which is going to be very scary, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking is like instead of saying leaving Avoti structures intact, I was thinking of more like Do I use unfettered? No, I can't do that here. No. What's up, Shambleman? Well, I was looking through the Avot, the latest concept, if you want to check them out on the site. And now I'm just updating them. Earlier today, I worked on the where are we? Visual design pillars for the Ansifii. Avot update is right what we're doing now, and then theoretically, I'll start working on some idea for the town center for the Ansifii. I might do that on stream. I might not. We'll see. So yeah, I'm thinking at this point. Okay, so we will say instead of structures intact, we'll say establishments. Ignoring Avoti establishments for too long will almost certainly result in. I guess that should also be Avotion, not Avoti. Okay, I think that's fine. And then I wanted to add another sentence to this paragraph talking about something related to their base layouts a bit more. I guess it's technically fine to just say that their expansion attempts are taken by the bold and the sure, and that you've talked about the conservative nature of their layouts, like the style, if you will. I guess we could just add a hyphen here, especially with a general the Avotion predilection for remaining for we'll just reorder that. So I feel like this is a pretty solid update. I will take another look at maybe the... Is there something else that needs to be elaborated on? That's the question. I did mention that there's going to be ways to absorb enemies and somehow translate that. Because there's absorbing the corpses of enemies is something these guys can do. But absorbing enemies... I'm not sure if it would like clone or if it would just... Because cloning is obviously the Rosellium thing, and that would absorb corpses. Absorbing entire enemies just straight up is kind of cool. Dude, I don't know what the fuck I've been listening to this whole time, but it's a bit of a prank. We'll change to this. That you guys can't hear anyway, so whatever. I also don't know about the biological tag. It's mostly just a non-technological tag, but I don't really know if there's a good term that doesn't make it sound like it's only biological, like organic, I guess. I guess organic would be a fine term because, like, you can say organic chemistry or something, but biological means specifically a living entity. So maybe that's what we'll say. And then I just have to find every instance of So we have Rune. Rune are kind of more manifold anyway. I feel like that's a fraud one. Orlithray, Gadamempter, and Thruck are up next. Yeah, Gadamempter is also manifold. Oh, I guess not. Yeah, I guess he is. Whatever. Okay. Gadamempter will become manifold. Dude, the Natter is South. I need an update at some point. I'm not going to bother with them right now. They're not retail, but do them at some point, I'm sure. Frauded. Yeah, it's not going to be manual. Or, I mean, it's not going to be automatic. It will be manual. Oh, wait. No, Gadamempter is not even organic. What a dummy. Manifold and Rune are also... I feel like Nata Rasath are a little bit more on the Imperious side, to be honest. But that is kind of funny to me, though, because that means that we only have, like, one familiar. I guess Ember Cedar familiar. I'll change them over to. This is Manifold. Because of the fact that there's going to be a lot of micromanagement associated with the Squire, I expect a lot of players to just use it for specific niche things. But there's a lot of potential for being able to just walk through and... I think there's a lot of potential for being able to say, like, oh, I've got my opponent, I can catch them off guard. I've spotted their expansion. I'll leap over there and harass. Stuff like that. We'll see how it works out, obviously, but it's definitely I don't know if it's a concern, but I recognize it'll be a fairly niche unit probably. And for that reason, I'll probably move it to the right of the Maverick, because the Maverick is going to be the old reliable from a conceptual standpoint. Yeah, they're like that's the thing, is like the Githrovan are definitely like more likely to, like, very unlikely to be hostile towards them, right? So I guess these guys are kind of organic. Coloplazos. Not really gonna have technology in the same way, but I don't know. We'll see about that. Yeah, I think the trouble is like when you put an active ability on a unit that can be used very frequently, assuming you have the right conditions. In this case, keeping the unit moving all the time to charge up the energy. That does mean that there's like more APM overhead and more opportunities for you to express your skill if you're a high APM player, and I'm totally fine with that. But you don't want to make that the only way that you can succeed, obviously. And nor do I think it's really a threat to do that, but that's something that I always think about. I think with the Avot, I will probably. I think we've done enough, to be honest. But like, there was that idea of the. Okay, yeah, there was the idea of absorbing weakened enemies and like more information about their uh, technology. Let's see. I did just mention that they have like a wide variety. They leverage their impressive speed to close distances before their inevitable collapse, and in the cases where even their more brittle entities can survive indirect combat for long, the destruction of their enemies is really far behind. So they have high DPS, basically. But some of their units are like a lot of their units are fairly collapsible. They're kind of antithetical to Thruk in that sense. Thruk will have decent damage and DPS overall, but like the resilient versus like the slow lumbering versus the brittle swarming. Not all Avot will be swarming though. Like they're listed as lively instead. You know, as far as the Avot are concerned, I'm pretty sure they're going to. Okay. Oh, here's another siren. Owned. Okay. Done being destroyed, hopefully. That's like the third siren today. That's 3. That's 3. So yeah, I guess the most difficult aspect of the most unclear aspect of the Avot is what their end game tech really looks like. I've just made like vague allusions to the power that is there. Uh, okay, I guess we can just mention. Okay. Oh no, I actually wrote out the main idea where you'd have an average of 7 to 8 combat units and 1 to 2 utility units. I guess this would be 2 utility units. It would be 2 to 3. So you get this idea, and again, that's just an average. Like some might have more, some might have less. I think Ember's Seat might have a little bit more than 100. They might have closer to like 110 or something, but that's probably as far as we'll go. I don't think we need that much more. It'll probably be 3 or 4 for most regencies. I guess some very specific ones will have 2, but some won't really have the same conception of a branch in the first place, and that'll mostly be used for organizing the tech tree maps on the websites and maybe helping to frame different strategies that you can use. Because some of them don't have tech requirements, some of them don't have the same style of tech requirements. Like some of them obviously have conventional, where you build like some corollary to an engineering bay in Cosmonarchy Brood War, and you get access to everything at tier 2 in terms of structures, but then you need to build those structures or add-ons in order to get access to the units. Like it's segmented in that way. A lot of that is stuff like that. That's like that's basically how Brood War was for Protoss and Terran in vanilla. And then there's like the Orla Thray have structures that evolve over time to give more units. Obviously, that's in some way inspired by Zerg. There's going to be a bunch of other ways that are like more unique. So depending on the regency, the access to more units is going to be a little bit more easy. For example, a lot of them will be more dependent on just specific types of production structures, and that's almost their version of having a dedicated tech structure. Instead of having a dedicated tech structure, they would just have more specialized production facilities, and maybe you would only use like 2 out of the 4 for each tier or something, or each branch, I guess. The idea being that you wouldn't need to specialize necessarily. But it's definitely possible that we end up going way beyond 100 units. It's just that I've already figured out a formula that I think will work pretty well. There is the concern that coming from Cosmonarchy Brood War, where you can go barracks, factory, starport, scrapyard from tier 1, and you have access to way more units than 10 at tier 1, that it will feel weird, the adaptation process. But instead of building a scrapyard to access more units at tier 1, in Cosmonarchy, you would build a tier 2 structure to access more units, and you would just ascend up the tiers. Because you can afford to do that a little bit more regularly when you have 10 tiers instead of 3, if you know what I mean. Like standard Brood War, Protoss, and Terran were basically the conventional segmented tech progression, where you have, I build a structure to unlock another structure to unlock a unit. And that's essentially how it was for, like in Terran's case, it was a lot of build a structure to unlock an add-on to unlock a unit, or just build an add-on to unlock a unit, like the machine shop with a factory or whatever. But it was a lot of like just progress through the tech tree in a kind of a somewhat linear fashion. And then Protoss had occasional interdependencies where for Arbiter Tribunal you needed Templar Archives and Fleet Beacon, I think. So that would be like one example. Or maybe it was like Templar Archives and Stargate or something. I don't really remember. There's definitely a lot of potential for varied openers. It's just that some regencies will probably have easier access to their own personal tier 2 than others. Although to the degree to which that varies, I probably don't want to screw up too much, because if one has a much harder time ascending up the tech tree, that would obviously be more limiting for them. But the idea that I have is just that, like, so the obvious corollary for Terran is Ansifii, but Ansifii are still very different. And when you go into Ansifii and you have like this idea that I should be able to build infantry, vehicles, a spacecraft, and shadow stuff, like weird experiments, all from tier 1 because you played Cosmonarchy's Brood War mod, you're going to be in for a rude awakening, because you're going to get in there and there's going to be like a barracks and a barracks add-on type, and then you're going to have like a vehicle bay. And those are going to be your 2 production facilities for tier 1, aside from your town center, obviously. And the vehicle bay is going to be mostly good for utility stuff initially. And then as you ascend up the tech tier, you'll be able to do more stuff with vehicles, more stuff with spacecraft, that sort of thing. But in the early stages of the game, you're mostly going to be revolving around infantry. In fact, their whole regency revolves around infantry. Like, there's going to be more mechanized playstyles, but infantry is the name of the game, and they just have a wide variety of infantry. So they have some jetpack infantry that might be able to hover for a brief amount of time. They have infantry that can leap, like the Squire. They'll have more conventional infantry that don't really have a gap close, but just walk around normally, like the Maverick. Stuff like that. So, like, as a result of that, I think maybe Ansifii just aren't going to be something that most people who are looking for super varied, like, massive. I don't really think there's going to be any regency that comes to mind besides maybe Ember Sea that has like super ridiculous openers where you can instantly go air and infantry and vehicles. Well, I guess like one or the other, but like a bunch of different kinds. I think Ember Sea might be one of the only regencies that's like that. But even then, they're meant to complement each other. You're meant to like acquire a lot of them. So, I think at this point, yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty convinced that the Avoti are in a state where I can comfortably update them. I just need to figure out how I'm going to talk about their like high level tech. And I think the biggest stumbling block right now is the concern about the idea that they're going to be able to absorb weak enemy units. I don't want to overstep the gravitational thing for Cathethrons, obviously. I think every regency will have some form of mobile production. That might even be what these absorbing things are, is that they can convert them into specific units. Like, maybe you consume weakened enemies, and the more of those you do, the more these specific entities produce like additional fighters that you specify. So it would be like setting them to produce a fighter type, or setting them to produce an armor type, or something like that. It's kind of weird because the traditional roles don't really apply to the Avot, but yeah, there are going to be some that when they die, they split into other ones. There's going to be some when they die, they split into missiles, like the Augur in Brood War, in Cosmonarchy Brood War. Then there's going to be some that are like damage field of some sort, or like enchantment field, or whatever. Like their Rebel. So a lot of that stuff is a lot of like on death effects are going to be pretty common here. So Yeah, I guess we could talk about I guess the main trouble with that is that it is a little bit of a form of, it's not really automated decision making because you're making the decision, but it does feel a little automatic to go the route of like my mobile production facility is automatically producing units because I pathed it over some corpses or whatever. But I still think that's positional enough that there's like a reason. I am testing for a reasonable amount of like the skill to defeat the enemies, the skill to absorb their corpses with this thing, the skill to train the thing in the first place, the commitment to getting the tech out and stuff. So that's probably fine. I think my dog is destroying people. Appropriate. Where's the dog race? Now that is a good idea. Well, we will have some sort of like Todd-born sequel in this engine. So I hope I don't end up using some really banging gameplay concepts that I would prefer to use for Xibalba's proper regencies for some meme, because that'll be really embarrassing when people ask, "How did you get the idea for this killer mechanic for the Dalventhos, Pronogo?" And it's like, if you've ever checked out the Todd-born, the anime race has this really similar mechanic. Fucking annihilated. I do like the idea of uh yeah, I do like the idea of just cosmic level shit for the Avoti. It's pretty banging. Like they are literally made of stars, or they are stars, I guess, in a small sort of way. This is still kind of cheating about the whole gravity thing, but I kind of like the idea of some endgame transport type units that move incredibly fast. Maybe like the Anthelian, where they charge up a move and then they manifest at the destination. And if you take that idea, but instead of them being like a unit with a lot of power themselves, like their on death effect would be pretty nuclear, I imagine. But the idea of like you have the concept of this giant star form, and it has the concept of orbitals. So you have orbital units that are like literally satellite units or whatever that it can contain, and maybe it like grows in size somehow. I'm not sure how that would work, but I like the idea of being able to instantly like instead of the Anthelian in Cosmonarchy Brood War teleporting and then ripping apart a bunch of units and like pulling them to it or whatever. Instead of that, it's an Anthelian that has a bunch of other units around it that like when this unit arrives at the destination, they can disembark, like leave orbit and start attacking a bunch of stuff. So it'd literally be like pulling a bunch of allies to a location, like teleporting a bunch of allies to a location and depositing them there. So it's like instant transport of entire regions or something. It would basically doom drop them, yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess if it blows up, yeah, it would probably do that. It would just nuke the whole area. That's why it's kind of high risk, high reward. Because if you're like rearming, like say you teleport a bunch of units there and then disembark and then teleport out, you're like, okay, you saved your unit, and then the army gets cleaned up eventually. If another player strikes at your guy while it's in your base, like your big transport star, while it's in your base, suddenly you just nuked yourself. So like there's a lot of interplay there. I think it's really neat. Even more imposing are the grand cosmic bodies that orbited by allies to the Avoti, or to the Avot. All right, I like that. This is pretty solid. Let's grab this, slap it in there, and I think we'll take a look at what else we have for today. But I think that's probably going to be it. We'll just make a plan for tomorrow. I'm liking the every other day setup that I've got going on for these streams. I hope I'll be able to keep that going because it's pretty nice to be able to like update people on the how things have gone. I don't think I updated this at all, so that's fine. Let's quickly spell check. Outscaling is not a term according to this. That's fine. Okay, that's it. Well, it's not really a loading in the sense that they're inside the stellar body. They're orbiting it out externally, and they'd be fully attackable externally as well. So they'd be like satellites instead of it being like more conventional transport where it's inside it. But maybe there could be something like I don't know. There could be something like maybe the more teleportations it's successfully made, the more unstable it gets or something. I guess you could do that. Star form that can trigger the death rattles of nearby forms as if they were its own all at once. Oh, that could be like, that could even be like a utility unit or something, like utility mystic that triggers death effects of allied Avoti, or something like that. I might just be allied in general. Maybe it like enhances their death effects or something. So we could also put enhances triggers. I like that idea, and just because it's like another way to interact with the same kind of system. All right, we are git add, git commit, update Avot. Okay, and I think we can go ahead and slap this into the updated. Okay, and what else? All right, I think at this point I will be able to get at least one or if not both of these visual concepts done after the stream. But I am going to take a break, take a walk, stretch my legs, that sort of thing. I've been standing up for a couple hours now. For tomorrow, I definitely want to take another crack at some more individual unit concepts. So we'll say more tier 1 Ansifii concepts. And maybe I can do this as well, because that seems like a pretty easy thing to do, pretty low effort to add these things to the documentation somehow. So unit concepts. We'll try to flesh out the tier 1 in general, at least get some idea of the structures and the different units that are available. The reason why I want to note mechanics related to supply is that there is not going to be supply in Cosmonarchy. It doesn't scale well as a system, and you basically it results in entire situations where you can find somebody's hoard of supply units or structures, and they take up a ridiculous amount of build space and resources, and they're mostly useless outside of their dedicated role. And then when you blow them up, your player can't do anything with the infrastructure that they've placed otherwise. So you basically it's basically a very like binary mechanic after a certain point where you've scaled up past a point where you really need to build that many more units. And it doesn't work very well with the scale that we're going for whatsoever. Now, it's possible to make it work in smaller scale stuff, I think, but that's only because the obvious downsides to it are not aggravated as much. In this case, it's very clear to me that it's way better to just remove it entirely. So I wanted to point that out, is that there is no supply. There's no planned replacement for supply, because I don't really think supply actually did anything. Instead, we'll probably have higher than Brood War convention resource costs for production facilities, and the production facilities themselves will be a main way that you are gated in terms of how many units you can produce, because the cost of getting another one is a little bit higher, a little bit steeper in most cases, just because. So like in Brood War's case, if you're ever in a situation where you have, enough resources to queue, 3 extra Marines out of your barracks while you're training 1, that's 150 minerals. That's enough for another barracks. You should just build another barracks, assuming you have the income to sustain that, which is an assumption you can make in Melee. I don't think that will always be the case in Cosmonarchy by comparison, just because the production facilities are going to be a very different beast. So, yeah, it feels like when Cosmonarchy's new units kept showing up on the pages. Yeah, kinda. It's kind of nice to see like a little spattering here and there. We'll probably focus a little bit on Ansifii going forward, and then I guess up next will probably be Makroldas, because we have got some visual concepts for those. And I guess beyond that, the world is our oyster. We'll maybe do Keltar, Ythrovin, Emberseat, Psychora, all that stuff. All right, I think that's been it. That's been the stream. And we are going to be back in 2 days as usual. At least that's the current plan. So I'll see you on Saturday, I think. Yeah, that would be in 2 days from now. So see you boys Saturday. And yeah, bye.